Hey, look, somebody asked me a question. I better answer it.
Hey, it's Aaron from AaronOnAutos.com, and today I have a question from Buck. Buck wants to know, who decides to issue recalls? Is it the government or auto manufacturers? That's a very good question because a lot of people maybe are not really conversant with the recall process, how it works, what is required. So the answer is both. It depends on the situation, and it can be both of them at the same time. It can be either or. It just really depends. So the way the system works is the consumer complaints are logged by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Then they are investigated, and most of them are quickly resolved. So it's quickly figured out it was a consumer error, it was the situation, blah, blah, blah. Some of them are, it does look like a manufacturer error. If that is the case, the NHTSA then takes that complaint, sends it to the manufacturer, and says, you need to look at this. The manufacturer then looks at it and does their own investigation, figures out if it's happening more often, and once they've done that, they do figure out, hey, it is happening, and it probably is because of our process, or something was missed, or whatever. Then they issue a recall, which is called a voluntary recall. So they will contact the NHTSA. They'll say we're going to do the recall, and then they will issue the recall itself. If they find nothing wrong, they return it to the NHTSA and they say, we don't see anything wrong here. The NHTSA then continues their investigation. So the real kicker is multiple complaints. If there is only one complaint because something happened and it doesn't seem to be happening otherwise, it just kind of gets shelved. It gets ignored. If there's 2 or 3 complaints, then it gets more thoroughly investigated, and that's more likely to turn into something. Now, so looking at that overall, here's how it works. Sometimes it works the other way. Sometimes the manufacturer becomes aware of a problem, sends it to the NHTSA. Sometimes, so they can skip some of these steps. Sometimes it's not consumer driven. Sometimes the manufacturer realizes an error and they go ahead and just do a recall. They skip the whole investigative process and just go straight to the recall. However it works, the process is very, very well defined. So what can happen is the government can say there is a problem. Whatever you said is wrong. You have to do a recall. If the manufacturer then says, fine, if they're smart, they will say, okay, and they will issue that recall and go ahead with it. It's still it's still considered a voluntary recall. They don't get any bad publicity for it. Boom, they're done. But if they resist it, and if you remember years ago with the unintended acceleration thing where Toyota tried to fight it, if they resist, then they are forced into a recall by the government. That usually also comes with a bunch of fines, a bunch of bad PR, a lot of other things that the manufacturer probably does not want. So that is the government's baseball bat, right, to kind of beat them into submission. The flip side of that is the company can sometimes quietly get around all of that by doing smaller recalls and just doing a lot of them over time. Is they issue tiny recalls, so in the scheme of things, they're pretty small. They issue these small recalls for specific models, and that goes out, and they do that recall, and then, a little bit later, they do another one for another set of vehicles. It's the same recall, but it's different vehicles. And they just do that in a little succession over several months, and nobody really notices. Some people that watch it every day, like me, I will notice, but it's still not, like, for what I do, it's really not newsworthy. I don't tend to cover that sort of thing. But there are some outlets that do. So they may or may not notice that trend. Regardless, that is one way for a company to do a very large recall in smaller segments and then save themselves the huge PR hit. Sometimes that's not worth the trouble, and they just do the big one. But However it works out, the point of the recall is almost every recall issued is voluntary. So almost every recall issued, the company decided to do it. It's pretty rare for them to go to the point where the government has to force the issue. Early in this, when this system was pretty new, back in the when did they start this? I think it was the 70s. Back when this system was pretty new, there was a lot of government forcing, and that's because they were, the Transportation Administration was really they were establishing themselves. They were making this is what it's for, right, kind of thing. But over time, there's been a synergy created where the manufacturers have realized that it's generally in their best interest to just do a recall and spend that money than it is to try to fight it and then in the end ultimately probably just spend more money. So the basic recall process is pretty simple, works pretty well, and it seems to be covering the bases for us. So that's what I got. Hopefully I answered that question. You got a question, right? Of course you do. So you're going to hit me up down there in the comments. You're going to find me on AaronOnAutos.com. You're going to look me up on the Facebooks, Twitters, and so ons. You're going to tag me when you do that. And you're going to ask me these questions. Buck here got to me through what was it? I copied and pasted it to another document, so I don't remember where it was from. Believe it's Twitter? Not sure. Anyway, he got a hold of me one of those ways. Okay, so get a hold of me and ask a question. I'll do my best. All right, it's been Aaron. AaronOnAutos.com. Talk to you again soon.